There's a specific kind of quiet dread that comes with finally having money saved. You did the hard part. You didn't spend it. It's sitting there, $20,000, a number that took real years of restraint to reach. And instead of feeling like an achievement, it just feels like a decision you're now afraid to get wrong. Here's what almost nobody tells you at this exact moment, the moment right after you've saved it and right before you do anything with it. That $20,000 is never going to feel more powerful than it does right now. Sitting still, doing nothing. And that's not a comforting fact. It's the opposite. Because every year it sits there untouched, it's quietly becoming worth less. Not in the number on the screen, but in what that number can actually buy you. A coffee that cost you $2.50 a few years ago costs you closer to $4 today. Same drink, same cup. The only thing that changed is what your money is worth. Stretch that same quiet erosion across your rent, your groceries, everything you'll ever need to buy, and $10,000 worth of goods in 2015 costs over $14,000 today. Money that just sits still isn't neutral. It's going backward. But here's the part that actually matters. The part this video is really about. That same $20,000 put to work instead of left still isn't just protected from that erosion. It becomes something else entirely. The seed of every single financial milestone you'll ever reach after it. Not because of luck, because of exactly how compounding actually works, which almost nobody explains with real numbers. By the end of this video, you'll understand both of those mechanisms completely, and you'll know exactly what to fix before you invest a single dollar of what you've saved. Here's what you're going to walk away with. 1. The 2 actual ways money grows when you invest it. Not vague concepts, the real mechanics, explained with numbers you can run yourself. 2. A demonstration of why your first $100,000 takes roughly 7 years to reach, and your fourth takes about 1. And why that single fact changes how much your first $20,000 is actually worth. 3. The 2 things worth fixing before you invest anything, and the exact reason skipping them turns investing from something empowering into something quietly stressful. Let's start with why leaving money still is never actually neutral. When you've finally saved a real amount, there are really only 3 things you can do with it. Spend it, hide it somewhere untouched, or leave it sitting in a bank account, earning close to nothing. The second and third options feel safe. They aren't. And the reason is inflation. The quiet, constant force making your money worth a little less every single year, whether you notice it happening or not. This isn't abstract. It's the coffee that used to cost $2.50 and now costs $4. It's the $10,000 grocery bill from a decade ago that would run past $14,000 today for the identical goods. Money sitting still doesn't hold its value. It slowly loses it in a way that never shows up as a dramatic single event. Just a quiet erosion you only notice when you finally stop and measure it. Investing solves 2 problems with the same motion. It grows the money, and it protects what you already have from that same erosion. That's the why. The far more interesting question, the one that actually changes how you think about your first $20,000, is how. There are exactly 2 mechanisms behind investment growth, and understanding both properly changes how the entire rest of this makes sense. The first is ownership. When you invest in a company's stock, you own a genuine, if tiny, slice of that actual business. If the company grows, opens more locations, sells more products, earns more revenue year over year, the company becomes more valuable, and your slice of it becomes more valuable with it. Your money didn't grow because of luck or timing. It grew because you own a piece of something that got worth more. The second mechanism is the one worth sitting with slowly, because it's the one that changes everything about how your first $20,000 actually functions. Compound interest, sometimes called, without much exaggeration, the 8th wonder of the world. Compound interest is simply the returns you earn on your previous returns. You're not only earning money on what you originally put in, you're earning money on the money that money already made. And then, the year after that, earning money on all of it combined. That sentence is easy to read past without actually feeling it. So run the real numbers. Say you invest $1,000 a month, earning an average 8% annual return. Reaching your first $100,000 takes roughly 7 years. 7 years of steady, disciplined contributions before you cross that first milestone. A genuinely long stretch of time, and it's worth being honest about that up front, because pretending otherwise would be exactly the kind of inflated promise this channel tries to avoid. Here's where it turns into something different. Your second $100,000 doesn't take another 7 years. It takes about 4, nearly half the time, because you're no longer only earning 8% on new contributions. You're earning 8% on your entire first $100,000 and everything it's already generated, at the same time as your new monthly contributions keep landing. Your third $100,000 takes roughly 3 years. Each milestone after that arrives faster than the one before it, not because you're contributing more, but because the pile earning that 8% keeps getting larger on its own. By the time you're approaching your first million, an entire additional $100,000 can show up in roughly a single year, the exact same monthly contribution you started with, producing a result that took 7 years to reach the first time around. This is the actual meaning behind the snowball doesn't roll at a steady speed. It starts slow, almost frustratingly slow, and then it doesn't just speed up. It accelerates because every previous year of growth becomes part of what's generating the next year's growth. Here's why that changes what your first $20,000 actually is. It isn't simply $20,000. It's the seed sitting at the very beginning of every milestone that comes after it. The reason people who start early, even with genuinely small amounts, end up dramatically ahead of people who wait for a bigger, more comfortable number to feel ready with. In investing, time in the market matters more than the size of the amount you start with, because time is the input compounding actually needs in order to work. If time matters this much, the instinct is to move fast, get that $20,000 working immediately. But there are 2 things worth fixing first, and skipping them is exactly what turns investing from something that builds confidence into something that quietly builds fear instead. First, expensive debt. If you're carrying anything at a high interest rate, a credit card sitting around 20%, for example, clearing that comes before investing anything. Paying off a 20% debt is functionally a guaranteed 20% return on your money, and no stock market on earth will promise you that in writing. Investing while carrying that kind of debt is like pouring water into a bucket with holes already in the bottom. The compounding you just watched build so powerfully above gets quietly undone by interest working against you at the exact same time. Second, a real emergency fund. 3 months of essential living expenses if it's just you, closer to 6 if you have a partner or dependents, kept somewhere genuinely easy to access and still earning a reasonable rate while it sits. This isn't caution for its own sake. It's what stands between an ordinary emergency and being forced to sell your investments at exactly the wrong moment. The single most common way people accidentally undo years of compounding in one afternoon. Once both of those are handled, one more step before any investment account gets opened at all. If a workplace retirement plan offers an employer match, capture the full match before doing anything else. That's about as close as personal finance ever gets to a guaranteed, literal, immediate return. Money added to your account simply for contributing your own. After that, using any tax-advantaged account your country makes available lets the same compounding you just watched happen without a portion being quietly taxed away along the way. Foundation handled. Now, what do you actually put the money into? For a lot of new investors, the first instinct is to look at whatever performed best over the past few years and put money into that. It feels intuitive. It's also a genuine mistake, and the history behind it is worth sitting with because it's more dramatic than most people expect. In 2010, Nokia controlled roughly 37% of the entire global phone market, the dominant name in an entire category. 10 years later, that share had fallen below 1%, and the stock price had dropped by nearly 70%. Anyone who bought Nokia specifically because it had already dominated the past would have watched that entire logic collapse in real time. Zoom out further. In the 1980s, the largest companies in the world looked completely different from today. Heavy industry, automakers, oil and gas. By the early 2000s, the list had shifted again. Exxon, Walmart, Cisco among the giants. Today's largest companies look different again, and out of that early 2000s list, only one name remains near the top today. Past dominance, again and again across decades, has never reliably predicted future dominance. This is why, as a beginner especially, concentrating everything into individual stocks is riskier than it feels in the moment. Your entire outcome ends up depending on a small handful of businesses continuing to make the right decisions in an unpredictable future. It's the oldest warning there is. All your eggs, one basket, one stumble, and the whole thing cracks at once. The lowest effort, most historically reliable starting point for a beginner is a broad index fund, a single purchase that holds a slice of thousands of companies across dozens of countries at once, rather than a bet on any one of them individually. It requires no special market knowledge, no correct predictions, no luck. You set it up, automate a contribution, and let the mechanism from earlier in this video, ownership plus compounding, do the actual work over years. Quietly, in the background. It isn't exciting. That's largely the point. Investing that feels thrilling in the moment is usually investing that's quietly concentrating your risk somewhere dangerous. The biggest risk in investing was never really the market. It's behavior, and two specific patterns account for most of the damage. The first is procrastination dressed up as caution. I don't really know what I'm doing yet. I'll start once I've learned more. Understandable, deeply human, and every month spent waiting to feel fully ready is a month of compounding that never gets recovered, because that early period is exactly the seed stage this entire video has been building toward. You don't need the perfect investment on day one. You need to start small, stay consistent, and let time do what only time can do. Looking at the S&P 500 specifically, investors who stayed invested through any 20-year period, including the Great Depression, the dot-com collapse, and the 2008 financial crisis, have historically come out ahead, not despite those events happening. Across them, the second pattern is chasing whatever's trending. It happens to nearly everyone early on, and it isn't really a personal failing. It's a well-documented psychological pattern where learning just enough about a topic to feel confident is precisely the point where you're most likely to overestimate how much you actually understand. That's what pulls people toward whatever stock or coin is suddenly everywhere, right before it stops being everywhere. If picking individual investments for the excitement of it genuinely appeals to you, that's fine. Just size it as a small, deliberate portion set aside specifically for that purpose, not the foundation carrying your actual future. And the final, quietly expensive habit, selling during a downturn. When markets fall, the instinct is to pull money out to stop the bleeding. But that's the exact moment that turns a temporary paper loss into a real, permanent one. The investors who come out ahead over decades are typically the ones who stayed calm through the falls, sometimes even added more during them because they understood the mechanism well enough not to panic when it briefly worked against them instead of for them. Here's what's actually true about that $20,000 sitting there right now, feeling like a decision you're afraid to get wrong. It was never going to feel smaller or less significant than it does in this exact moment. Every year, you wait for it to feel like the right time. It's quietly losing value to inflation, while the 7-year clock on your first real milestone hasn't even started yet. You don't need to know everything before you begin. You need the debt cleared, the emergency fund built, the employer match captured, and one boring, diversified fund to put the rest into, then time, doing the one thing it does better than anything else in personal finance. Your first $100,000 will feel like it's taking forever? It's supposed to. That's the slow part of the snowball, not a sign that anything is wrong. What you're actually building with that first $20,000 isn't a number. It's the seed sitting underneath every milestone you haven't reached yet. And the only ingredient it was ever missing was you starting.